Next, from the Illinois State Capitol, we speak one-on-one with Illinois State Treasurer Dan Rutherford. We hear what changes the new State Treasurer has made in his office over the last 7 months, and we get his thoughts on the state's finances and whether it should borrow more money to pay its bills. This runs about 30 minutes. State Treasurer Dan Rutherford, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
You know, as we are taping this, we are taping it on the day when overnight there was an agreement, an apparent agreement to solve the debt ceiling standoff. The vote has not yet been taken, so we will talk about some of those issues in that context of being right on the cusp of these things happening. Just give us your general overview as far as what impact would any of this have on the state of Illinois?
Well, let's go talk about, what came to this point. I mean, what happened the week or so coming to this point that whatever it may be. What we saw was slowly as we moved towards that August 2nd date that interest rates started to creep up. Now, it wasn't something that probably was seen at the consumer level yet, but they were certain basis points, which means 1/100th of a percentage point. But we saw them start to creep up even to the point that on August 1st, we met at 6:30 in the morning in the trading room for the Office of Illinois State Treasurer with my investment team after having had twice daily phone conversations, even through the weekend on Sunday night to see what the Asian market was going to be doing. So we met at 6:30 in the morning on August 1st to be prepared so that if something had come down in a not so good way, that we could get in, make purchases, secure. And what we found was that interest rates had crept up again this morning. Now, for us in the state treasury, that was good because it meant that we had about $3 billion this morning, that morning, that we needed to put into some kind of interest-bearing account so that it would be tied up for 24 hours. So we got a little bit of interest for the state treasury. So interest rates were up. That was good for us. As we see this whole debt ceiling thing sort itself out, if it is resolved, which by the time this is broadcast, I hope it is, that I think that interest rates will start to come back down and stabilize.
We might want to say that your office does a variety of things, but probably the number one thing, if this is fair, is that you invest money for the state while it's sitting in the state's checkbook waiting to be paid.
And that's really all the other things that I do as a state treasurer, it's unclaimed property or financial literacy or those kind of things. They're important, but the reason the state treasurer exists is to be able to take the state portfolio and top priority, number one, is make sure it is secure so we don't lose any money. Secondary is invest it so we can try to have some kind of a return, some kind of an interest, which helps then go in the treasury to help keep things going. So, for example, on August 1st, I had about $3 billion of liquid funds, meaning that they didn't need to be used for disbursements to pay out payroll checks or Medicaid reimbursements, all of those. So about $3 billion that morning of August 1st, and about $1 billion of that was from the state portfolio, and we put that in and got the certain percentages to it. We had about $1.5 billion in local funds, meaning that other taxing bodies, whether a city or park district or forest preserve, have us invest their money to be able to keep their overheads down and the like. And the other is we had about almost $360 million worth of tollway receipts. So we invested that today. So just under $3 billion were managed on August 1st. The one day, it's just an overnight, we brought in about $21,000. Now, that's not a lot of money compared to $3 billion, but it was only for a 24-hour period in a very volatile market area right now. So that's the reason I exist. The office exists, is to invest the state's money and have it the most secure way possible.
Yeah, and simply put, interest rates going up would cause havoc across the economy, but relative to just like a senior citizen getting more money on their CD,
exactly,
it actually might work to the benefit of the taxpayers in that small, narrow area of where you're investing the funds.
You're totally absolutely right. Absolutely right.
When you look at what could have been a default and conceive, it looks like we've avoided it. Did you do any planning and conferring with other financial officers in the state as far as what the impact would be and what the reaction of the elected officials would be?
Well, here, As far as other elected officials, not directly because, I mean, through staff levels we were, but not directly because if there were to have been a default, there's two things. One of them, which is my area of concern, is the portfolio safe? And we had already gone ahead and prepared a worst-case scenario plan to move some of the billions of dollars that would become available to be invested into non-interest-bearing accounts. And let me just explain real quick that we have to keep funds available in the Treasury so that when time comes to pay payroll, time comes to pay a certain bond, a road bond, you know, it's not due every day, it's maybe, you know, in December. So we know when payments are about to come due, so we don't tie them up, the funds, in, let's say, and make up something here, a 2-month money market when we need a lot of that fund available in 1 month. So the way it was calculated out, our staff prepared that in a 30-day window, that if the worst happened, we would have in the state treasury and other funds about $7 billion that would become fluid over those 30 days. Now, if it happened, we'd hope it wouldn't have to last for 30 days. So what we had the contingency plan to be is to move whatever, as we move 30 days to $7 billion, take that money, because it's such a volatile situation, and actually park it in a zero interest but yet insured account. So that the important thing for the people of Illinois to know is that the Treasury would have been secure. It would not have lost any money. We would have had it insured. Downside is we wouldn't get any interest. Well, that was the most secure way to go. A second thing, though, had the debt ceiling not been lifted and we had moved to a default, is the fact that there are about $8 billion that the federal government gives to the state of Illinois for this year. Previous year was $17 billion, about $8 billion. Approximately half of that is for Medicaid reimbursement. About a third of it is for schools and public safety. So if that debt ceiling wasn't lifted, then the federal government would have to determine who they gave money to within the debt limit they had. My guess is it probably wouldn't have been to reimburse the states. It probably would have gone to pay Social Security checks, military payroll, and other Homeland Security needs before it came to the states. So that was the second issue that was of concern on the debt ceiling. A third issue came down to the bond rating of the federal government. Today, the federal government's bond rating is AAA, premium, very good. If there was a default on the bonds, their rating would likely have gone down, which meant it would have cost more for the government of the United States to borrow money. But then there's what's called the halo effect, splashback. It will splash back onto the states, and particularly Illinois, where our bond rating would be impacted by the federal's bond rating, and it too would go down, and that too would cost us more money to borrow in the market than if we had a higher bond rating.
When you invest, and as you say, do you ever invest in instruments that are longer than 24 hours?
Oh, yes. Yes. And again, I want to be real clear. When there's about 700 accounts within my state portfolio as the state treasurer, and that's where we've got about 10 to 11 billion dollars. There's 700 accounts. One account might be the barber's license fee. So when you go to the barber or beautician, you see the little thing hanging on the wall, that's a license, and that money comes in. It's in a dedicated fund for monitoring barbers. I don't know why we do it. They might cut your ear off or something. It's crazy, but they do it. Another may be where the driver's license fee or license plate fee that you pay comes in. It's a dedicated separate account because that's what's used then to pay the bonds to build the roads and the bridges and so forth. Okay, the proceeds to come out of that account that goes to pay for bonds for roads and bridges isn't every 24 hours you do that, so it's there until it's needed. So we work with the agencies and the comptroller and the governor's office to know. So there's going to be cash there that we know we could invest in a longer term, 1 week, 2 month, 1 year, 3 years. And as you can appreciate,
so you actually go out some that might be.
Sometimes we can go out multiple years, yes. And with that being said, you get a better interest, you get a better return, usually the longer you can tie it up. But the finite or the
but you also run the risk then of locking in money, would you not, on the longer term?
Well, we lock it in at a rate that we know we're going to get. The risk would be we locked it in and we could have got a higher return.
Right.
But again, if you recall
Opportunity cost.
what I said at the very beginning, the number one thing that Dan Rutherford as a state treasurer is responsible for is the security of the portfolio. Second is to make the return. So yes, we do lock them in longer terms at times.
You know, one of the things too, we never, as Americans, ever question in our lifetime the value of the dollar. Now it's increasingly being questioned, and certainly would be if the United States government were to default. Has this topic come up where, to the extent that you might diversify the portfolio that you invest, and would you put it in other instruments, whether it's the
Sure.
Swiss franc or gold related investments?
Yeah, we wouldn't do it directly in investments in commodities, okay? Because that does have itself the volatility. We wouldn't do that. What we do look at is commercial paper, or we do look at other sovereign debt. So for example, what I did do is had my staff do an analysis the early part of this year to find a comparison for sovereign debt. And what this would mean would be funds that one could invest in that were managed by, for example, the Swiss, the Canadians, or even in the case what we did was we put a $10 million purchase, which is a lot of money, but it's not, you know, compared to today, August 1st, like I said, we invested $3 billion. But we did put a $10 million investment, which was over a 1 or 2 year period, I don't recall, into Israeli bonds. And it wasn't a political reason because of the issues about, you know, Hezbollah and Israel and the Palestinians. It was not that. What I said to my staff was, I said, what is it that we can do that would help, number one, security, but also add some diversity and do a good interest. And when they did the analysis to it, actually Israeli bonds came in as significantly better of a return than other sovereign debt, and for that matter, other investments within like type of portfolios that we could have done. I made the decision to go ahead and do that.
You know, one of the things that when you're turning around a situation, a bad economic situation, as the state of Illinois has been in, and on one hand we had the tax increase passed in January.
Right.
According to the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, they reported in June that the state revenues had grown, rounding up, $3.4 billion. So we're in the neighborhood of about $7 billion more on an annualized basis.
And that's with the largest income tax increase in the history of the state of Illinois.
Right, now we're still...
So I mean, I just want to make sure that's all out there, because this state treasurer did not feel we should have done that at that time. But
well, that was one question I was going to have, because I thought you had been opposed to it. Where would we have been as far as paying the bills had we
sure.
not done that?
But here, let me back up. And that's why I was careful how I said what I said to you at that time. You know, if there was a need at some point in time to have further revenue, whether it's an income tax increase or something else, I'm a private sector businessman. I happen to be the state treasurer now, but I've been a 25-year private sector businessman. I've negotiated contracts for 25 years, globally and for major Fortune 100 company. And my contention is you don't negotiate one piece of a contract with other pieces laying out there that need to be fixed or a part of that contract. I believe that if you wanted to go out and look to raise the income tax in the state of Illinois, one also needed to address the unfunded liability of the state public pension systems. One needed to deal with the workers' compensation structure, and one needed to also deal with the whole issue where we are in regards to spending. What happened was when this lame duck General Assembly and Governor Pat Quinn signed into law the largest income tax increase in the history of this state, those other three things were not taken care of. If there was such an insatiable appetite and a need for more money to raise the income taxes, well, you negotiate an entire contract, fixed workers' comp. The worst black hole, the sucking sound that's going on out there right now is because of the state public pension systems, the unfunded liability. Not the workers themselves. They work hard in state government. They deserve a fair pension. But what's going on now is a $140 billion unfunded liability with interest and the health care that's burdened and saddled for the future taxpayers. And then going ahead and putting together a budget that was predicated now, this new in the past, on this increased spending when we got, this increased revenue when we got to look to ramp it down. That's where the big problem was. Passed without fixing the other big things that had to be fixed.
As state treasurer, and you've only been in the office for 7 months or so, you know, when we have things like this issue, the pension, and it's going to be an ongoing conversation about how we can adjust the current pension for current state workers, not just the new ones.
Right.
Should the Treasurer's office, we've already said, predominantly your responsibility is to invest the money while it's sitting in the state's checking account.
Mm-hmm.
Should the Treasurer, should the Comptroller's office, should they be part of that discussion, or is that, and you've come from the House of Representatives and the Senate, so you know the legislative responsibilities,
Mm-hmm.
is that more of the responsibility of the legislature and the governor's office?
It's totally part of the legislature. It's totally part of the governor's office. They're the board of directors. He's the CEO. But when you get a CFO, chief financial officer, out there that has an understanding of economics and business, I think it's imperative and appropriate for me to weigh in on those things. And I did quite upfront with regards to Governor Quinn's desire to borrow $8.7 billion in his budget address in March. And this is on top of having already had the largest income tax increase in history. So yes, I weighed in on that, and I put together a white paper that was prepared by municipal bond advisors to help me that we released in May. And no, I couldn't stop the General Assembly if they had a 3/5 vote to give the governor further borrowing authority. But you know what I can do? I can articulate, and I can use the bullet pulpit. I can use that camera, and I can use this microphone to talk about how bad it is and what it means to the economy, what it means to taxpayers, and we did that. Ultimately, the General Assembly, in their good wisdom, did not give the governor that authority. And now as we see what's happening in Washington, D.C., what's happened in this whole debt ceiling limit, if the bond ratings had been affected and so forth, it would have had dramatic impact on the state of Illinois because of the amount of borrowing we've got going on. So to your point directly, Terry, yes, I intend to use the benefit and platform I have as a treasurer to weigh in on it. Directly with legislators, and if nothing else, the court of public opinion, because I think it's important for the public to understand what's really going on with the finances of the state of Illinois.
You know, we could talk all day just on this, and time's always limited, but
we'll put another cartridge in there.
I'll do it. What do you want the people to know about the current state of the finances from your perspective?
Yeah, and let me, I will separate this in two areas. The most important for me is what they believe and see the state treasurer's doing. The most important thing that they should understand that this state treasurer is doing is making sure of the security of the portfolio. I will not take risk to lose money. Okay? That might be a little conservative for some, but I'm not going to do that. I will, in a calculated, methodical, thoughtful business approach, look at ways to securely draw interest. Okay, I told you some of the other sovereign debt, unique ways, not risk, but did ways that could bring in additional revenue, interest. That's what I'm going to do. So that's the important thing I want you to walk away from Treasurer Dan Rutherford's comments. The second side of it, though, is in regards to overall macroeconomics and fiscal condition of the state. And I'll tell you what, it's really bad. It's really bad because of the high unemployment rate we have. It's really bad because we have a budget right now that is passed that used the spending of this largest income tax increase in history, where it is supposed to expire in 4 years. Well, you don't go spend all that increased revenue that you got from an income tax increase, knowing that and keep the same or higher spending levels, 6.6% higher spending levels than previous year, if you're looking to ramp down in 4 years. You can't continue running the show like this. And I'll tell you the other thing. You asked me, the other thing that I want them to understand out there in the real world is the fact that you can't keep borrowing more money. Here in Illinois, it was said that the reason we had the income tax increase was so we can go out and pay for current bills. Okay. In March, the governor says, I want to borrow $8.7 billion to pay for current bills. Well, which one is it? And if you go and you add more spending on the $42 billion we got in general obligation bonds, you add another $8.7 billion on it, when we are the second worst rated creditworthiness state in the country, it just costs taxpayers more and more. Splashback, halo effect. The same thing happens on local units of government. Because of our poor credit rating in the state, it affects local units of government. Right here in Sangamon County, where we're taping this at the state capitol, Sangamon County went in the market in March of this year to borrow $10 million. Because of the credit rating of the state, their credit rating isn't as good either. It cost the taxpayers of Sangamon County $700,000 more in interest than if they were Muhlberg County in Kentucky. Because Muhlberg County in Kentucky has a better credit rating than Sangamon County, because the state of Kentucky has a better credit rating than the state of Illinois. So I guess, you know what, as we turn this tape off and this thing is over with, what I want the public of Illinois to understand, number one, Dan Rutherford, the state treasurer, is going to protect the portfolio, protect the wallets, get interest if we can, but it's going to be safe. And number two, the finances of the state of Illinois are in a shambles. And if it continues to be run the way it is right now, we're not going to get out of it for generations, and we have to understand we cannot allow further debt and borrowing and go out and raise taxes to keep the insatiable appetite of spending on the way it is today.
You know, as you say, you were in private business, you negotiated contracts. People have a hard time understanding, since businesses balance their budgets and homeowners balance their budgets, why can't the state?
It's a part of the consternation that you see happening out in Washington, D.C. Why do we have the President of the United States, the United States Congress, the United States Senate take us on to the eve of a default for the most solidly stable economic country in the world? It's because there's egos, there's politics, there's, you know, it's bitter. And the same thing happens here in Illinois. And I got to tell you up front, if the Illinois government was a private sector business, they would be drawn before an investigation panel and probably thrown in prison because of the whole way this whole pension system's been run. You know, those kind of people would be indicted, and they would be bankrupt, and they would be, the board of directors have been thrown out, and the chief executive officer, the CEO, would have been fired if this was a private company. It's not. It's a sovereign government, and, you know, we got to do the best we can with it. And I don't want to sound, oh, woe is me, pessimistic. You know, that's great. We got democracy. We elect our leaders. But I think right now it's about time for some people to stand up and say, you know what, we have to have some tough love in Springfield.
Do you serve on the board of any of these pension investments?
I do. I do now as a state treasurer.
And are you looking to have a stronger voice into how some of those have been run?
Well, yes, but here's the difference. I serve on the investment side of it. Okay, so the portfolio, how it is invested, is what I serve on. I don't serve on the board of directors, meaning the General Assembly, or the CEO, meaning the governor, on what type of benefits are awarded, or what type of participation is supposed to come from the General Assembly through an appropriation to the respective pension funds. Okay, I don't serve on that. Yeah, I look at where it's invested, but they've got to fulfill their part, and we cannot continue on this program that we've got the way it is now.
We've seen different states. Mm-hmm. We've seen famously Wisconsin and Governor Walker up there take on the unions in his state. People look at the pensions, and on one hand, I had one union official say to me, the pensions aren't that much. The average state pension is $34,000, if I remember what he said right. But on the other hand, that compares to the average taxpayer doesn't have any pension. Mm-hmm. When we see that there are overly generous, and I don't mean to say that $34,000 necessarily is overly generous, but when we see examples, who signs off on this? And people say, where is the fiscal responsibility? Again, as someone who's negotiated contracts, mm-hmm. where does the blame lie when we have whomever, whether it's the governor or the legislature, signing off on to pay benefits that the taxpayers won't be able to afford if you run the numbers?
You know what, when you say who's to blame, I mean, there's probably a whole basket of people, a whole basket of politicians and personalities. Is from multiple, it's been the General Assemblies, it's been governors. I don't think we can just put it on one. I think, and I guess maybe that's where I'm coming at this. I don't know that I want to go back and find the blame. I want to say, okay, what do we got to do to get this thing fixed?
Well, let me say it this way. Not to find the blame just to beat up someone in the past, but if there is a systemic problem, sure, then how do we make sure
good point.
That we don't carry that problem forward?
Good point. I think what we've done is we have built a defined benefit program of pensions that have been continually added benefit and participants that does not have the ability for the portfolio return to pay for who's going to eventually be retiring. Part of it is the fact the state didn't put in its pension contributions that it should have. My understanding is about 40% of that problem is because of that. That still leaves the other 60% that comes from, I don't want to say an unduly needed and appropriate enriched pension benefit. I don't mean that, but it is a defined benefit. It means it doesn't matter what happens to the portfolio performance, it's a defined benefit. You're going to get it regardless. Well, you know what? There were two companies that we know very well here in America that had those as well. One's called United Airlines, and they went bankrupt. The other's called Caterpillar Tractor. They didn't go bankrupt, but both of them changed from defined benefit to a defined contribution program. Today, United Airlines is out of bankruptcy. They are a solvent company, and Caterpillar is a tremendously valuable part of the American economy, and particularly the Illinois benefits. They're doing very well too. Illinois government has to face up to the realities. We cannot continue in the defined benefit program we have.
You know, we have a couple more minutes left, and I want to turn to when you ran for Secretary of State a number of years ago against Jesse White. You made investing in technology and improving the performance of government an issue. Recently, we heard Julie Hamos, cabinet officer here, say that they have computers, and she oversees the Medicaid payments, computers that are 30-something years old. Mm-hmm. Comptroller Topinka said her computers are something like 25 years old. And one wonders how many millions of dollars in the Medicaid system that we know from all kinds of reports are rife with fraud. Why can't we, as a state, have the technology so that just when I put my credit card in the gas pump, they can verify that I am who I am?
Sure.
Why can't we have a similar system and cut down on the probably tens of millions of dollars in annual fraud?
It's all sitting down to be a matter of investment priorities. I mean, right now in the state treasurer's office, we've got some of the very same problems in the fact that we are going through, and I have, as a part of my plan as a state treasurer, brought in the people to start moving us from one platform to another platform, because the old platform is antiquated. Now, it's not making the big news out there because we're not Medicaid, but it's we're managing billions and billions and billions of dollars. So I have, in the Office of State Treasurer, made this a priority for me in regards to the expenditures. Yeah, you know what? I've had to cut back on certain things. I got rid of 50% of the fleet cars when I became in office. The very first full day I was in Office of State Treasurer, right here at this desk, I signed the executive order to close 6 satellite offices. I said, okay, how many taxpayer-funded cell phones or BlackBerries do we have? Made it real easy. I said, if you need to keep it and the taxpayers pay for it, you walk in that door, you come see me, the treasurer. If you need to keep it, we'll talk about it. If you don't, we'll get rid of it. Got rid of 72% of the cell phones and BlackBerries from the Office of State Treasurer. I mean, it's things. Now, that's not a lot of money, but that's how I've started to move that I have authority over as a state treasurer to prioritize. And in doing that, some of those savings I'm putting towards infrastructure, and a lot of that's in the technology side of it. The other areas of government, whether it's the governor's administration or others, is they need to set that as a priority and explain to the appropriations process why investing there helps you bring back more money, whether it's Medicaid fraud and benefits, those type of things.
When businesses do you ever talk to businesses about that are looking to move into the state of Illinois?
I'm talking, unfortunately, to more of them that are looking to move out right now.
Are there programs that come through your office that would help any of those who are on the cusp to stay?
You know, there are some. You know, we've got link deposit programs we can work with to try to help them, low interest loan, assistance link, those kind of, there's some of those. Yes. So the answer is yes. Now, as you can tell, I'm being a little hesitant to make that the whole end-all be-all, because that's not it. Yeah, it's helpful. But the reason a company decides to stay in Illinois, grow in Illinois, or move out of Illinois is in part because of the taxes we have. It's in part because of the situation our workers' comp we have. Part of it is also regulations and paperwork and those kind of things. And I don't want to beat up the EPA, but those are as examples. Those are things that cause a company to do what they're going to do. I can come up with a link deposit program for the treasurer to do the little, I can put the little candy on top of the cupcake, but you need to have the cupcake. And that's why you rewind this tape and you go back to what I said earlier about what I said the problems in Illinois are and had to be fixed before we raised the income tax, by the way, which raised the corporate income tax and raised the personal income tax, which hits partnerships, which are businesses as well. And those 3 things I said, workers' comp was definitely one of those. So that's what we got to do in Illinois. I'm going to do what I can as the treasurer in what I can do with the programs, and I'm going to do what I can as the treasurer because I'm the finance officer of the state and use the microphone and articulate it and talk to the folks in Wall Street and in New York and talk to the businesses here in the state of Illinois and talk to the governor and talk to the legislature because some of the things that they're doing isn't necessarily best for job growth in the state of Illinois.
We'll close out here, but you were on national TV today. I caught you on CNBC and their business show recently. What is the purpose of going on those programs?
It fulfills two things in the fact that they ask me, because I'm the treasurer of one of the most bankrupt states in the nation, and I've stood up and I've said, you know, the way my state's going is bad, it's wrong, I don't like it, and I'm going to articulate the difference. So I think, one, they want to see somebody that's willing to say, hey, there's the other side of the story. So what it does, it fulfills two things. One, I think it helps get the message out that there is another side of this story. You're from Illinois and you saw it, and many in Illinois have done that as well. And I think the second thing that it does, it also helps impact opinion leaders, other folks out there, that there is somebody in Illinois that maybe does get it with regards to finances. So maybe when we start looking at the bond ratings of our state, or we start looking at areas to invest and the like, that maybe there is some hope out there that we can turn this state around. I think it fulfills those two things.
Well, State Treasurer Dan Rutherford, congratulations again on taking the office. Thank you for visiting with us, and hopefully we can come back again and catch up with you some months from now.
I'd like that.
Thanks so much.
Have a good day.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.